Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers for November 8th, 2018. All managers are present at the moment except Manager Loftus, Manager Miller, and Manager Shackleton. I see no members of the public. We'll move along then to item 3, which is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
I'm
Second.
going to give it to Manager Olson, second Manager Becker. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No controversy there. We'll move on. On the consent agenda this evening, we have the approval of the minutes of the October 25th, 2018 board meeting, and that is the only item. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There will also be a very brief President's report. I have had no external meetings for 2 weeks, so nothing to talk about. Manager Miller, we've just come to you. Could we get a brief report on the policy? I'm sorry, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
Manager Olson on the Operations Programs Committee.
You bet. Tonight, the Operations Committee report covers a staff presentation that we had an overview of the various accounting practices and improvements that are being anticipated and planned for and hopefully implemented between now and the second quarter of 2019. And tonight we are going to, we've decided to move the payroll discussion to our next meeting, internal controls to a much more next meeting, and audit proposals tonight, which are going to be on the agenda. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any meetings or event managers would like to report on? The upcoming meeting schedule is in the agenda. You can strike the November 14th Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. Otherwise, it is as shown, and in December, the CAC will have Manager Olson as its liaison. We'll move to item 10.1, permit 18626. And just the number tells a great story there, 626. Ms. Quinn.
Thank you, President White, Board Managers. This evening I'll be presenting permit 1866 for the This evening I'll briefly walk through the recommendations, the district rules for the project. The applicant has requested an exception from the floodplain alteration rule. So I'll go over that and then conclude with the staff recommendation. 10 sites have been identified for bank repair from the 2014 flooding, and the Watershed District, in partnership with the Park Board, have applied for a permit to do repairs to all 10 of those sites. I would also like to note that in the permit report it was stated that the MOU that is in place and executed would authorize us to perform the work on the property. Since the permit report was published on the agenda, we have received a signed application from the Park Board as well. So the permit would be, upon approval, would be issued to both parties. So just to show you where we are in the district, we're in the lower watershed, Minnehaha Creek in the city of Minneapolis. The project's kind of broken up into 2 sections. There's the 3 sites that are west of Lake Nokomis, and I'd like to note that Site 34 is about right here. That's not shown on this little sketch plan here. And then the other 7 sites are to the east within the Minnehaha Falls Park. So since there are 10 of the sites, I tried to break it down by the work proposed and the rules that have been reviewed and applied. One thing of note is that Site 13 is just for trail repair and is not within the floodplain, and then that Site 2 is for just also for trail repair but is within the floodplain. So overall, the project does trigger the erosion control rule, the floodplain alteration rule, and the stream bank stabilization rule. For the erosion control rule, The applicant has submitted plans showing the locations where the sites will be accessed through, rock construction entrances, silt fence where necessary, and provided a plan for floating silt curtain as for when, if winter conditions were not to hold during the work, and have provided inlet protection where needed, and a final stabilization plan, and has met the criteria of the district's for the stream bank stabilization rule, there are 8 sites that propose work on the bank of the creek. To try to show you through visual where they are, I tried to do some color coordinating here. So site 5, as shown here, is proposed for riprap. It's also being analyzed under the retaining wall criteria because the slopes are proposed at a 1-to-1, which is steeper than the allowed 2-to-1 slope. Bioengineering with soil lifts are proposed at site 8. And then sites in the purple here. So site 9 is the replacement of riprap over the existing retaining wall, which the district permitted in 2008. Site 10, and I'll go into a little bit more detail, just kind of an overview. Site 10 is riprap, and then for bank stabilization and to stabilize an exposed outfall, and as well as repair some limestone slabs. So that portion, limestone slabs, are reviewed under the other shoreline improvements for public access. And then site 11 is a similar situation where it's repair and salvage of existing limestone stairs. And then jumping up kind of to the western portion, site 30 is for riprap, once again reviewed under the retaining wall criteria. And then site 34 is bioengineering stabilization, and I think I skipped over site 26 is also proposed bioengineering stabilization. So a portion of one of the provisions of the stream bank stabilization rule is that the applicant must submit max velocity and shear stress equations to indicate which type of stabilization is appropriate based on those equations. The portions to the left are the max, or the velocity and the shear stresses that have been submitted, and then the stabilization practice per the rule, and then their proposed methods. So they are requesting design flexibility at site 5 and at sites 26 and 30, where the shear stress came back lower than what they're proposing to stabilize. Based on some actual data that were submitted from the USGS station, we ran the 100-year flow in 2014, which is shown here, against the district's model that is used to plug into how you calculate the shear stress. And that number did come back higher than what we had modeled for the 100-year event for that kind of time frame. Additionally, the design flexibility portion of the rule is in there as a measure to when the applicant thinks that the degree of erosion is greater than what is shown through the equation, that they can submit additional information and evidence to justify that. And based on review of the current existing site conditions that are, at those locations and photographs submitted, staff and the district engineer agree that with the proposed stabilization per the design flexibility criteria. So then if we're going into the bioengineering stabilization, so 3 of the sites are proposing bioengineering. The applicant submitted plans and cross-sections detailing that out. These are cross-sections of the 3 sites. Slopes won't exceed 2-to-1 and will be built with the appropriate buried toe boulder and granular fill, etc., as listed in the rule criteria. I would like to note that these sites, then, the areas in red here, those are the soil lifts to support the native vegetation that will be seeded, and that is also what's constituting as the floodplain fill. So, as I mentioned, 2 of the 3 sites proposed for riprap have slopes that exceed that 2-to-1 ratio, and therefore they were analyzed under the retaining wall criteria. The district engineer has confirmed that the proposed methods that are indicated in the plans are in conformance with generally accepted engineering principles and will withstand the velocities and shear stress of the creek. And this is showing those sites for 9, 10, and 11. So on the left is site 9, where the riprap is proposed to be put back against the existing retaining wall. Was also analyzed under the retaining wall criteria. The middle site is site 10. So that's where the repair of those slabs will take place. That was analyzed under other stream bank improvements. And then riprap will also be installed, which also matched the shear stress equations to stabilize that portion of the bank and that exposed outfall. And then site 11 in the bottom right, they're going to essentially salvage and reposition those kind of limestone slabs that come down to the creek to provide access. So, excuse me, overall, the project as proposed does meet the district's shoreline and stream bank stabilization criteria. Kind of moving into the requested exception, I just wanted to remind the board that upon demonstration by the applicant, the Board of Managers may grant an exception to the provisions of the rule if a greater degree of natural resource protection is met than with strict compliance by the rule alone. The applicant has requested an exception to provisions 3A and 3B for fill within the floodplain without creating compensatory storage and have provided information that demonstrates that the proposed fill will not increase the 100-year flood stage. They are requesting the exception to the rule, as the way the rule is written is that there's no timeline for like restoring an existing condition. It would be just in the present. So any fill brought in even to address erosion and destabilization that was caused by the 2014 flood would still be considered to be fill within the floodplain. All other aspects of the floodplain alteration rule have been met besides those two provisions. And so I tried to break it down here again. So what they're asking for an exception for is essentially the placement of 115.5 cubic yards of fill within the floodplain without providing cut to make up for that fill. Site 2 is just for the trail down here. And then site 26 isn't included in here because there's actually no proposed fill. They're going to be able to kind of salvage the existing materials on site for the soil lift. And so in order to kind of demonstrate a greater degree of natural resource protection, they have submitted an estimated lateral resection equation as well as quantified the estimated amount of erosion based on the 2014 FEMA damage report, and then looked at those numbers compared to the proposed amount of fill, and then estimated what a net gain in storage capacity would be based on those pre-2014 flood conditions. And so two things of note on here as well. The trails in site 2 here weren't included in the lateral recession equation because they're actually pretty far from the bank. However, they are within the floodplain. And that the FEMA estimate was only 6 cubic yards back in 2014. However, based on rain events that we've had since there, more of that trail has washed out, and that's why that estimated fill of 19.5 cubic yards is larger. Additionally, at site 34, which is this one up here.
Is that Nicollet Avenue?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Is that adjacent to Nicollet Avenue?
Yes,
Lindale.
Lindale with the boardwalk. Yep, so that's what I was just going to reference. So we did permit, a separate permit to the park board recently. It was 18-271 because they weren't sure if the timing of the projects were going to work up for the putting in of a new boardwalk at that site. And through those plans in that project, an additional 48.79 cubic yards of floodplain storage were created because they were able to do some additional grading since they were doing a lot more site disturbance by taking out that boardwalk and putting a new one in. And then bioengineering will be proposed to stabilize the banks there. So based on kind of this model and looking at things this way, it was estimated that this was probably about the rough estimation of erosion that we experienced during the 2014 flood, which is less than the amount of fill that they're proposing. So based on looking at it in this framework, we'd be creating an additional just over 60 cubic yards of new floodplain storage from pre-2014 conditions. And so to conclude, if the staff recommendation that staff find that the applicant has submitted adequate justification for the board to consider the requested exception to 3A and 3B of the floodplain rule, which are for placement of fill within the floodplain and acceptance of the information and modeling to demonstrate that there'll be no rise in the 100-year flood stage from the placement of that fill, and that an estimated just over 60 cubic yards of additional storage would be created, which exceeds the baseline, which would require no new storage to be created following the strict provisions of the rule. If the board determines that to be of approval, then staff recommend approval of the permit with the conditions and stipulations listed in the permit report for erosion control, floodplain alteration, and stream bank stabilization.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the exception to the floodplain rule 3A and 3B?
So,
Manager Shackleton, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, any discussion? Manager Shackleton? Manager Miller?
We didn't have this ahead of time, so I couldn't ask for the question, with these. We put all these improvements in, 7, 8 years ago, correct?
I think it was approved in 2008.
Okay, 10 years ago. And it didn't pass the test of a flood. We're repairing it, and we're relying on the same consultant that we relied on to design the original improvements. And we're just renewing it. Are we going to seek FEMA funds in 3 years when this gets washed away too, or what's the program here?
Ms. Schaffler?
Manager Miller, managers, you raise a good question, and what the FEMA funds have allowed us to do is they actually give us funds to go above and beyond what we designed in 2008, 2010, so we're actually making things more resilient based on our new data and the 2014 flooding information. So the goal of the FEMA funds is to do just that, to actually build things so they don't have to come back and give us funds, ideally in the future.
So this is going to be more target hardened for future floods than our previous design?
Yeah, ideally, even the limestone slabs at Site 11, we're creating the base a little bit different. So we don't think that'll be scour and then have those collapse happen. And just looking at different designs of riprap, different designs of bioengineering to try to be resilient to those high stream flows.
And how have you tested this? It's the same engineer that designed the previous improvements has designed this one, and this is going to be better because they say it's going to be better, or what?
Manager Miller, managers, so actually we had Interfluve design more of the actual stream bank repair work, where Wank in 2008, 2010 had designed that. So Interfluve is more of your stream morphology experts and relying on them more to drive that piece of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton.
section in the middle, that is number 11, just for clarity's sake.
Yeah, Manager Shackleton, number 11 would be the bottom right with the limestone stairs.
So I'm thinking about the one in the middle where
That's
where the person is standing.
This one?
Yep.
Yep.
Where are the conversations with the park board on the deer pen? Because I know we've had conversations with the park board about pulling back the stormwater pipe that dumps out right there, which would be going in and ripping that all apart.
Yes.
And I just want to raise the question of timing of one
Yeah.
and the other.
Manager check on the managers. So that isn't the pipe that we'd pull out. It's actually further downstream, that's a very small little
No,
pipe.
no, I understand that.
So and I committed as part of the whole FEMA projects to working with the park board, just as ongoing broader issues of O&M issues that have been going on down there. So we've been having those conversations about what that would look like, what sort of maintenance framework is best suited, not only for this site, but just broader across all of our parklands and our work that we've occurring with them. So we're starting to figure out some good frameworks, working off our agreements that we have with St. Louis Park for the Minnehaha Creek Preserve, because that's a good mix of infrastructure. So those conversations are happening, and then the potential to pull out that outfall is going to come a little bit after those conversations. So we want to first get our feet under us and have a good plan for what's currently in there, and then start having conversations about how to expand.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Other question I had was on number 5, and where is it in relation to the historic dam? Like, is it upstream? And was the scour at the dam, or was it?
Manager Shekel, the manager. So number 5 is downstream, and it's that bank where the current boardwalk footing is hanging in the air.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. That's the blue one, the blue box?
Yep.
Awesome.
The metal.
Yeah.
There we go. So here's it's kind of a big file.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, so it's this existing boardwalk, like Tiffany said.
Sure.
There's a footing that's being undermined.
Yep.
So it's the harder one is proposed.
Is it, I thought when I looked at the, when I was looking through this, that there was something that was further, I don't know. I thought there was something, a project that was right near there, and that was not this, but I'm wrong. Based on looking at both of your faces, I know I'm wrong.
Near the former mill dam area?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's nothing.
okay.
Anything else? Those in favor of granting the exception, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is there a motion to approve permit 18625 with the exception just approved and the conditions and the stipulations as stated?
So moved.
Manager Shackleton, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Any discussion or questions? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item 11.1 is Resolution 18114. Ms. Reynolds.
This resolution goes into the selection of the district auditor in response to the RFP that that was approved, and we just received responses back on October 26th is when it was closed. This will be the district auditor for the contract would be for the next 2 years, at which point in time, in accordance with the statutory obligation to go out for professional services every 2 years, we would issue a new RFP. 6 vendors provided responses to the RFP, and I will go over this in an abbreviated manner since we did discuss this earlier at the OPC. Proposals were reviewed by staff looking at the experience, both government and watershed-specific experience, the knowledge of the proposed staff, the ability of them to meet the April deadline that we have imposed on us by our notes with Wells Fargo, and then the cost of the proposal. This is the chart that we kind of made looking at those criteria. Watershed Experience, the 2 vendors that came in with that one were both Redpath and Abdo Ike. Every vendor that submitted a proposal does have government-based auditing experience. Several of them noted in their proposals that they could meet the April schedule, with 2 of them noting that they would complete it in May. 2018, let me back up. the knowledge and experience, that is not noted on this chart. I couldn't figure out how to put it in there in a nice package for you. Of all of the vendors, their staff included, the majority of them being CPAs. If not CPAs, they were, those that were noted were in training or in review courses for their CPA exams. They did indicate they are all current in regards to the required ongoing education for them for their CPA certifications and all the rest of the certifications that they hold. When you look at price, just comparing the baseline price, Redpath comes in at $34,100, which was the highest of the cost, and the other one with the watershed district experience, which is where we kind of focused as being the defining factors of the 6 vendors, was Abdo Eichen Myers at $25,000. As I discussed during the committee meeting, the numbers there, I do know that you have to put a qualifier on those, as Abdo Eichen Myers bid this as strictly an auditing proposal, which is what we put out there, which was for an audit. And Redpath has historically completed a lot of our year-end accounting as part of the audit. And so Redpath's numbers really includes what they've done historically, which includes a lot of the year-end accounting processes. And in that evaluation and discussion with Redpath to see what that may be, they estimated that at being $5,000 to $7,000 of that proposal, audit proposal amount being year-end accounting work. With some of that overlapping with what's also in the accounting contract, is saying that the accounting contract is covering as year-end accounting work. If you have anything further that you wish for me to cover from the previous committee meeting, I will go in more detail, but as we covered it in quite some a lengthy discussion, that's kind of the brief overview. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Manager Shackleton.
What would Redpath's cost be if they were just doing audit? If it's just to do an apples to apples comparison as opposed to not?
When I don't have the direct, I asked him to give me what the year-end accounting work was that they were doing, and he came back and they informed me that it would be $5,000 to $7,000 of that was kind of what they would tag into that year-end accounting. And like I said, he gave me an outline of what was included in that, and part of that is included in other auditors' proposals. Part of it was included in the accounting contract that we've signed, as saying that that's the accounting work that they're doing as part of the year end. So I don't have a real good definition of what it would be.
I'd like to make a motion to table until we can actually have a sense for what, I mean, like we should, if the recommendation is Abdo versus Redpath, and we have worked with Redpath and have a history of, and they have a history of what our organization is, as well as what we deal with, I think there's a value to that. If we're going to leave an organization, if we're going to walk away from an organization, I think we should have a rationale that's more than just if you say it's 5 to 7, then a $4,000 savings.
There's been a motion to table. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Holman?
Madam Chair, just to note, there isn't a motion on the floor yet, so it isn't strictly a motion to table, and it is debatable if you
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18-114? So is it the board's wish to gather more information along the lines of what Manager Shackleton has suggested and bring it back? And I have a question about the timing. When do we have to have the audit process start?
Madam President, it would be best to get a contract in place with an auditor so we can start the kind of pre-meetings for the audit, which would normally be going during, at this point in time, we would be getting prepped for it and prepared for it. I will see how fast Redpath could get the information back to me. Ideally, we would like to be able to do it in November, but since the meeting is next week and packets are due tomorrow, I'm not sure I can get that from them that quickly.
December 13th. Can we get the audit finished in time?
I am not sure how fast and how, curious by the December 13th, you fit right into the holidays that we can get the pre-meetings done for them to get their setup and, things in place to do it. I do, obviously if we tell them, I'm sure they'll have the resources assigned to it to do it if you give them a contract. But I do think that you are going to rush the pre-stages at that point.
Mr. Wesker?
President White, managers, is there any other information the board would want so we can work with RedPath to bring that back next week? In other words, if we bring it back next week, we want to make sure that there's no other information that, might facilitate your discussion and decision.
Other questions?
I don't have any other concerns.
Manager Loftus?
Apologize, I missed the committee meeting, but it sounds to me like if RedPath can give us an informed number that gives a little more apples to apples, that's what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Okay. I think generally speaking, a $9,000 savings is favorable on a professional service that ABDO is capable of doing. So I think generally I support your recommendation, but if we need to clarify if RedPath can do that quickly, it's in their best interest to clarify that quickly as well. I think you'd be on good standing to just give them a deadline when we need it by.
Manager Loftus, I have a question for you since you are city manager. It is considered best practice to change the auditor, as a question, not a statement. Is it considered best practice to change auditors from time to time? And is there a reference or a source for that, or is it just simply practice?
I think you could check with the League of Minnesota Cities, but I think just like your philosophy of going out for RFPs periodically, it certainly is helpful to keep professional services competitive when you're going out and comparing them against other professional services. And RedPath has clearly provided that service for how many years? I don't know the exact number.
I'm not sure how far back it goes.
Yeah, but they certainly aren't the only capable firm in the industry. So I think price matters in this circumstance when it's 30% savings. That's significant.
Thank you. Manager Miller?
It's not a 30% savings because it's not apples to apples, so we don't know what it is, and I think it's a fair request.
Sure, yeah.
They've, RedPath is, in the past, prepared the budgets and everything else for us. When we've had difficulty figuring out what was being proposed as a budget, we'd bring in RedPath to the board to make sure we had good understanding of the numbers and stuff. And a couple times they prepared the whole budget. And we relied on, they got intimate knowledge of the organization. And the thing that I think continuity is great. We have the same attorneys for 20 years, same engineers for 20 years, and we don't go out for requests for proposals. We go out for requests for qualifications, and it is so. I feel pretty strongly that that because of the relationship the board has with the auditor that works for it, doesn't work for the staff, that we should work on getting the price down, but if there's, and get a clarity on what's not included, or what is included that doesn't need to be with the audit. I think that's fair. I I don't support changing the auditors.
I think Mr. Shackleton's question is very fair. I'm not debating
So-
that. My only comment to that would be, I know Abdul provides financial services as well, financial management services. And I actually, when we had our last audit presented, I think it's not a bad thing to have separation between those two. It's a little, I think there's a little conflict when they're doing accounting services and then also doing our audit. So
Right. I agree with it.
I prefer the separation, but it's just a difference of opinion.
No, during the-
Manager Shackleton first.
Just a clarifying question on the timing, recognizing like procedurally, internally, we have to have, or you have to have stuff done by very quickly. What about doing a placeholder and sending us the information once it's available? That way we can take it up next week if,
Yeah.
I've got a week, they have capacity to revise their,
Yeah, Manager Shackleton, managers will be in touch with Brightpath in the morning if this is the direction the board wants to go, and we'll do everything we can to get it in the packet on deadline. If we can, it'll be in the packet a little bit late, but in advance so that you can take a look at it.
That's great.
Agreed.
Thank you. Manager Miller, do you have a further question? Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Reynolds. We'll see you next week.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
was Manager Shackleton's
Motion was not made.
motion?
A motion was
not
not made, so the tabling never happened.
Item 11.2 is Resolution 18-115. Anna Brown.
Here's the mouse. The mouse ran away from me, sorry.
Thank you, President White and managers. I'm seeking approval of an agreement with Three Rivers Park District for the purposes of installing utilities for the aeration units and then ongoing access to maintain and operate the aeration units as part of the 6 Mile Creek Halstead Bay Habitat Restoration Program. 3 of the potential aeration sites for this program are within Carver Park Reserve. South Lunston, one of those 3, is really the most productive carp nursery in 6 Mile Creek Halstead Bay, located here. And then both North Lunston and Sunny Lakes also have evidence of some low levels of production under certain conditions. So we've developed an agreement with Three Rivers Park District to allow us to install the electricity to access these sites for aeration, and then also allowing us to access to operate the aeration units on an ongoing basis. One item of note within this agreement is that it includes a provision where we will work with Three Rivers Park District to develop an operations and maintenance plan. Three Rivers Park District, in some of their other park locations, do regularly operate aeration units, and they've preliminarily agreed to work with us on the ongoing operation. So their staff would help us get the units to site, would help with the inspection and deployment using some of the best practices that they've developed. The way that the agreement is set up, we'll agree to an operations and maintenance plan, and then we'll sort of use the 3-year grant period to pilot that operations and maintenance plan. So we'll sort of work together and see what works best. And then at the end of that three-year period, we'll have the opportunity to sort of revisit the plan and make sure that it's working, and can continue to sort of revise that and refine it over time. Otherwise, the agreement is relatively straightforward in providing us the access that we need and establishing the relationship and the partnership between the district and Three Rivers Park District as part of this program. So with that, I can take any questions, and then we are seeking authorization to approve this agreement.
Is there a motion to adopt resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Double seconds. Any questions for Ms. Brown? Manager Miller.
Unrelated, of course.
Oh, out of order.
Why, it's something different. You've got adult car biomass removal indicated in Halsted Bay. The question that always comes to my mind is how come the carp don't migrate from Halsted Bay into the major lake, or do they?
Manager Miller, they do migrate to other areas in the lake. I think a lot of the conditions in the western side of Lake Minnetonka are more favorable to carp, so you see them in higher concentrations in the western area of the lake, but I think you probably find them in many areas.
Like at the restaurant in Excelsior.
Okay.
That's right. It's as good as Koi Pond, right? Anything else for Ms. Brown? All those in favor of adopting the resolution say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And on to 18-116, also about electricity.
Now we got to turn them on.
Yes, so we are also seeking authorization to enter into a contract with Telcom Construction for utility installation for these aeration units, as well as authorization to pay the associated fees to the utility companies. In July of this year, the board approved a contract with Telcom Construction to design the service delivery and then also to coordinate with the utility companies. There are 2 active utility companies in this area. Excel is the utility company for everything in Carver Park and north, so Mud Lake. And then Minnesota Valley Electric Co-op is the utility company for the southern lakes, which are Turbid and Marsh. Telcom was selected for the utility design through a competitive process in which we solicited 3 quotes and received 2 responses. And Telcom was awarded both for having the lowest price, but also for having a higher value, a higher level of service delivery as part of that process. Telcom is now completing the design and coordination work and has provided a quote for 4 out of the 6 sites. They've left off North Lunston at this time because, this is North Lunston here, the location of the nearest existing service is pretty far away. And because Excel would need to extend the primary line, and we're already in the time of year that winter charges apply, the cost right now is sort of prohibitive and outside of the budget to do North Lunston this year. But North Lunston is a relatively low risk production area, so there isn't much risk in waiting until 2019 for installation of that one. And then the other one that's currently left off is Sunny Lake. Sunny has a similar issue with the service location being far away, but it's also more remote to access for winter. So we are going to be looking at sort of the cost benefit of, instead of using aeration on this lake, installing another barrier as an alternative means of controlling carp in that lake. So we'll be looking at that early in 2019 and coming back with a recommendation in that regard. Again, it's a low recruitment area. There wasn't a lot of evidence within the carp study time, so low risk in not taking action right away. Of the 4 sites that are included in the proposal, so those are South Lunston, Mud Lake, Marsh Lake, and Turbid Lake. 2 of those sites we've experienced some setbacks regarding land rights, and those sites are Marsh Lake in the south, and then Turbid Lake here. So on Marsh Lake, we had identified a route where we thought that we'd be able to access using existing public land, but on further fee title investigation, it turns out that there is underlying fee ownership So on Marsh Lake, we're going to have to continue to work with some of the landowners out there to try to secure land rights to give us the access we need for aeration. So that site is likely being postponed until 2019 as we continue to work through those agreements. And then on Turbid Lake, we have a landowner who is willing to work with us on extending service delivery, but is only willing to do so on a term easement basis. So what he has proposed is that we have an easement that every 5 years would need to be reevaluated, and it would automatically renew, but he would have the right to terminate. Lessard Sams does require that the restoration activities are on permanently protected lands. So our next first step is going to be to circle back with some of the landowners that we've spoken with previously and see if they are willing to grant a permanent easement. We've met with all of the landowners on Turbid. There's really only one property that we might be able to circle back with, but we'll be in discussions with that landowner. If they're not favorable to a permanent easement, the alternative would be that we could consider paying for the installation of the utility on this site specifically, so rather than using the Lessard Sams dollars. Based on this proposal, that cost is about $13,000, and we'll exhaust other options first and then return to the board and let them know. We are still recommending that we approve the contract for these 4 sites so that if something, as we do make forward progress on Turbid and Marsh, that would enable us to move quickly. But of course, if it doesn't move quickly enough and causes the price of the installation to change, we would be back in front of the board for approval.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18-116?
Move approval.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker. Are there any questions for Ms. Brown? All those in favor?
Question.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, Manager Loftus.
Ms. Brown, you mentioned there are winter charges. Is that something we anticipated and planned for? And then my second question is, can you explain the contingencies? They're different percentages and
Certainly.
how you, just explain those for me, please.
Certainly. So Manager Loftus and managers, when we went into the budgeting process, we didn't specifically plan for winter charges, but a lot of the types of costs that would be associated with utility installation were unknown. The reason that we're able to proceed with some sites under winter charges and not others are that most of these sites don't require much or any extension of the primary lines, so much activity essentially by the utility companies. It's really only in the sites where there's a substantial amount of extension that it starts to drive costs in a different direction. And both Turbid and South Lunston and Mudd, the sites that we are going to be proceeding with this year, those are sort of the higher risk sites in terms of carp reproduction. So, even with some increase in service charge there, it is important that those sites that the utility is installed sooner rather than later there, as they're the most likely to winter kill. As far as the contingency, the costs that the utility that Telcom has given us are not as likely to change because they're quoted directly from the contractor. It would really only be an unknown. The fee basis is their best estimate based on what Excel has told them. So when I looked at those fees, it seemed that they were most likely to fluctuate and more likely to fluctuate from what they've preliminarily quoted Telcom. So I just wanted to be a little more conservative there and make sure that I fully understood the risk with what Excel and Minnesota Valley actually sort of tell us the true fees are in the end.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question.
Manager Olson?
Do they trench in the utility, or do they string it up?
Manager Olson, they'll be trenched at all these locations.
Thanks.
That was my question. Thank you. Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Good to go. Ahead of item 12, we'll move to item 13, the administrator's report.
President White, managers, start out with the usual water level updates. All the water levels are tracking in the right direction, which is down at this time of the year. So I think Nokomis is right around 815.4. The runout elevation is 815.1, so we're pretty close to being in a good spot with that. There's no rain forecasted, although we're getting a little bit of snow. Lake Minnetonka is 928.69, so we're 900ths off runout elevation there. We're at 50 CFS, and we'll be dropping that this week, and so we're hitting 928.6 right as the ice starts to creep in, so we're right on track there. Mooney Lake, I think we'd informed the board that the pumps have been turned off. We built infrastructure with the city of Plymouth. They own, operate, maintain those pumps, but they notify us when those are running. Those are still running. Current lake level is 989.3, and those pumps will remain on, or can remain on, as long as weather permits, down to 988, so we'll keep tracking that. With regards to Nokomis, as you know, staff's been working with the interagency team of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, the City of Minneapolis, the DNR, among others, but that's sort of the core group. And that group is now meeting with the Metropolitan Council and the citizen group that has been kind of making the rounds, and Representative Wagenius, who often accompanies them, to continue answering questions about water levels. So that meeting is coming up, and that's a meeting that Tiffany and I will be attending, along with leadership from the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board and the City of Minneapolis, and we'll report back after we have the meeting. I sent an email out, and I just wanted to remind everybody we've canceled next week's Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. President White covered that at the top of the agenda here, and then we're swapping out the Planning and Policy Committee meeting. We'll have Joel Carlson come in, have an executive committee meeting in its place. We'll do election debrief, talk about legislative strategy, and also on the docket for next week, if we've got time in the committee. Otherwise, on the board meeting agenda, we'll be discussing the MOD resolutions are up for consideration at the annual conference this year, and providing direction to the board delegates, which I believe are President White, Manager Olson. So there's a little bit of a schedule change. Manager Olson had asked at the last meeting where we stood with County State Aid Highway 44 and the sewage discharge, and I followed up with Tom Dietrich, our permitting manager. As you know, there was a sewage discharge right around 44 in St. Clair, discharged just kind of in the north and east corner of Halsted Bay, west side of the road, and it was caused by a cracked valve. Met Council got on that right away with their contract. The majority of the spill was contained. They had a boom out there and it replaced the valve. The issue was, and I think we'd had Wank working with them, that the tests after they'd contained everything showed some elevated levels of fecal coliform, and you'd asked how things were tracking. All the levels are acceptable now and safe, compliant, and stable. The way that they got at that was putting in some aerators to raise oxygen levels, which brought down the bacterial levels. So things are in good shape out there after that incident. On human resources, I had met with a contingent of the board liaisons. The liaisons are President White, Manager Miller, Manager Loftus. I met with President White and Manager Loftus last week, and we received a briefing from Springstead, our human resources consultant, on the job classification and the preliminary market data. So we had a thorough discussion of the classification, preliminary comp data, rough guesses at cost to implement, started to look at some benefit information. I think we'll regroup once more with that trio, and we're tracking towards presenting the classification and compensation information to the Operations Committee December 13th. See how things go, but we should be able to get in front of the board on December 20th for consideration by the full board. Let's see, I think two more things. this is really preliminary, but kind of interesting, I think. Education staff's been working with planners and our project managers. They borrowed some pedestrian counters from MnDOT, and they put them out for a week each at the Minnehaha Preserve and Arden Park to collect preliminary data. So they did about 6 days in each location. Obviously, it's the end of the year, so it's not high traffic for people out there. But they're going to be looking at this information and then considering how we gather more, synthesize that, and how it informs the programming in these spaces that we've created. So we can get baseline information on how people are using the infrastructure that we've built and how, when we do additional programming, how those uses over time might change. So, you know, it's handy dandy, it kind of reports these graphs and shows daily data, weekly profile, the profile over the hours and weekend versus days, so you get a lot of good data. But the sort of the high level is in the 6 days for the preserve, we totaled 419 pedestrians moving through the site, so it's about 70 a day are using the space that we've built, which is pretty good numbers for a cold end of October. And Arden Park, total traffic for the 7 days out there was 768 people, so about 100 a day. It's pretty heavily used for the walkers out there. So it's neat that we're able to get that information and have that start to inform project design as well as when the projects are built, the programming. And then the last update, Becky Christopher, her policy planning manager, celebrated her decade anniversary at the district this week. So a little bit of a celebration for her and wanted to pass along her congratulations.
Time flies.
Definitely congratulate her for us.
Will do. That's what I
I'm
have.
curious,
If
thank you.
there's questions.
I'm curious to know where the counters were placed in those two parks, two areas.
Mike or Tiffany might know. I don't. I don't know in Arden.
Okay,
Chair White, managers, the counter placed at the preserve is actually on the boardwalk. It would be the boardwalk segment directly east of the education area. So the area that has the low railing. So the thought process being there, we would get a true reflection of folks who are making a loop rather than coming in and out. So we get an idea of who might be moving from each direction, but most likely making a loop of some sort, whether they're using the bituminous trail on the boardwalk or the boardwalk loop. And I know Arden was planned in a similar manner, where they were looking at a location that it appeared folks would work through the site rather than double counting. So
thank you.
Photo-eyed.
I don't believe it's photoized, although they do test it. And I know Darren did mention that they test it with photos to make sure that it's not counting pets. So they check a height, and then they actually have folks walk through 2 people, 2 dogs, and see if it counts 2 or 4. And they sort of test that way first and make sure that it's calibrated so it's only counting pedestrians.
What about big dogs?
So no
That's
coyotes?
my question. Really tall dogs.
Deer?
But we are curious if there are deer using the boardwalks. So.
I bet there are.
Anything for Mr. Whisker? Then I would entertain a motion to go into closed session to discuss the value of the property for sale at 325 Blake Road in Hopkins. We have a motion. Manager Rognus, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We will go into closed session. Thank you, everyone.